This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The leaders of U.S. and Japan hold their first face-to-face meeting in Washington in a bid to counter China's growing influence. Tens of thousands of residents in Nigeria's Maiduguri fleeing their homes due to jihadist attacks. And UK's Prince Philip set to be buried this afternoon. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, coming to you live from our CGTN studios in Nairobi. I'm Richard Mta. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. A Ugandan startup turns discarded banana stalks to eco-friendly items. And in sports, more women taking up skating through Girls Skate South Africa. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. So good to have you with us. I'm Richard Mta. The U.S. and Japan have reaffirmed their defense alliance in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, this was among the outcomes of a meeting on Friday between Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga and U.S. President Joe Biden in Washington. Suga is the first foreign leader to visit the White House since Biden took office. High on their agenda was their policy towards China. CGTN's White House correspondent Nathan King has the latest.
Warm greetings and side by side at a press conference here on the South Lawn of the White House. Demonstrations to the world as the first leader invited to the White House of the Biden presidency, where the lens of this administration will be very much on what they call the Indo-Pacific and, of course, the Japanese alliance, which has been in place since the end of World War II. They, of course, are playing up this informal arrangement of democracies, as they call them, in the Indo-Pacific. Japan, the US, India and Australia. They're rolling out, they say, more COVID drugs, as we heard from the Quad Summit last month, but also focusing increasingly on security. Beijing regards this loose grouping as essentially a containment exercise. Also, Joe Biden saying that there will be cooperation on supply chains when it comes to 5G and beyond technologies, telecommunications, and also semiconductors and the like. Japan is much more enmeshed with China in terms of its economic relationships, and the US is worried about being too dependent.
Japan and the United States are both deeply invested in innovation and looking to the future. That includes making sure we invest in and protect the technologies that will maintain and sharpen our competitive edge.
In light of the current regional situation, the severe security environment, the importance of our alliance has reached new heights based on such common recognition. At today's summit, we engaged in far-reaching and candid exchanges of views on each other's political principles, challenges faced in each of our nations, our common vision, and other matters.
But Prime Minister Suga has a difficult balancing act. While they depend heavily on security from Washington, they also essentially rely on the trade between China and Japan as well. It's going to be very interesting to see how this visit is sold to the Japanese people and the American people as well, especially as there are deep differences between Seoul and Tokyo, key allies, which were the first visit by the US Secretary of State, especially when it comes to unveiling of a new policy when it comes to Pyongyang, the DPRK, North Korea. There are a lot of balls in the air when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, but you can tell that this is where the Biden administration want to focus. They're withdrawing troops from Afghanistan, but their eye militarily, economically, and elsewhere is very firmly on the Asia-Pacific region, especially when it comes to climate change as well. Nathan King, CGTN at the White House.
The Chinese embassy in the U.S. has voiced firm opposition to a joint statement by the U.S. and Japan. The embassy says China's internal affairs and territorial sovereignty brook no interference, and such a statement is harmful to peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific. The joint statement from the Suga-Biden talks in Washington underscored the importance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. It said the two sides encouraged the peaceful resolution of cross-strait issues. Washington and Tokyo say they also share serious concerns regarding human rights in China's Hong Kong and Xinjiang. The U.S. and Japan recognize the importance of candid conversations with China. They also acknowledge the need to work with China on areas of common interest. The funeral of Prince Philip, the late husband to Britain's Queen Elizabeth II, is set to begin soon. The service will be held at St. George's Chapel on the grounds of Windsor Castle. The Duke of Edinburgh died there last week at the age of 99. The ceremony is set to be a muted affair. Only 30 people, including members of the royal family, will attend. We will bring you more on this story live as the funeral services begin. All right, let's bring in Paul Barber joining us live from Windsor Castle. Paul, what can you tell us at this hour, and what do we expect?
Well, Richard, yes, we're about 4 hours away now from the Queen leading the country and her family in mourning for His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. In about 2 hours from now, on this beautifully glorious sunny day in Windsor, we'll begin to see a ceremonial military formation in the quadrangle in the grounds of Windsor Castle. And then at about 20 to 3 local time this afternoon, the coffin containing the Duke of Edinburgh will be taken from the private chapel inside Windsor Castle, and it will be placed on the back of a specially designed Land Rover. The Duke himself had a role designing it himself. The coffin will then be joined by members of the royal family, including his son, Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales, Prince Andrew, Princess Anne, and Prince Edward. Also, of course, Prince William, the Duke of Cambridge, and his brother, Prince Harry, who's jetted in from California. The two brothers, we understand, will not be walking together, though. One of their cousins will be walking between them. The coffin will then begin a ceremonial procession through the grounds of Windsor Castle towards St. George's Chapel. The coffin will be followed by members of the royal family, and then the Queen herself will be in the back of the Royal Bentley with just a lady in waiting with her. The procession will then reach the west steps of St. George's Chapel. Exactly 8 minutes later, everything's been meticulously timed, the whole ceremony and service itself very much the wishes of the Duke of Edinburgh, and there will be a military band playing the national anthem, and then a national minute of silence will be held at 3 o'clock local time, and that will then mark the start of the service. The service itself, as you were saying, Richard, just 30 members of that congregation, whittled down from a list of about 800 originally. This funeral happening in the time of a pandemic, meaning that members of the public are being urged to stay away from Windsor and not line the streets as would be customary for a big royal funeral such as this. The service itself very much a pared back affair, and in line with the Duke's wishes. There will be no eulogy to champion his many achievements and qualities, just a very religious affair. No singing, there'll just be a small choir of 4, but members of the congregation will not be singing, and we understand all members of the royal family will be wearing masks, including the Queen herself. And so after the service, the coffin containing the Duke will be interred in the royal vault beneath St. George's Chapel. That's not his final resting place. When eventually Queen Elizabeth II does die, he will be placed to rest with her in the chapel, the George VI Chapel, which is just part of St. George's Chapel. And after that, we understand that the royal family will then leave the chapel by car.
All right, Paul Barber, lots to keep an eye on there. Thank you very much indeed for bringing us the very latest from Windsor Castle. Now, in other news, the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, says it is saddened by deaths of over 40 migrants off the Tunisian coast of Sidi Mansour. The migrants that died after their boat sank on Friday are said to be from sub-Saharan Africa and were reportedly headed to the Italian island of Lampedusa. Search and rescue operations led by the Tunisian Coast Guard are still underway. As of Friday evening, local time, 41 bodies had been retrieved from the sea, including that of a child. 3 survivors have also been rescued. The UNHCR in a statement called for enhanced and expanded state-led search and rescue operations across the central Mediterranean. According to the UN agency, at least 290 people have lost their lives so far this year. Meanwhile, sea departures have more than tripled compared to the same period in 2020. Let's now head to Nigeria, where tens of thousands of residents of Damasak town in the northeastern state of Borno have fled their homes following a series of jihadist attacks. The latest attack on Wednesday by militant group Islamic State West Africa province left at least 20 people dead. The jihadists had earlier stormed an army base located in the outskirts of the town, but were repulsed and driven into the town. A soldier was killed in the initial attack. The UN agency said over 65,000 people had fled to either nearby towns, the regional capital Maiduguri, or crossed the border into the neighboring Difa region in Niger. Now, this was the third raid on the town in a week. The Borno State Governor, Babagana Umara Zulum, is calling on residents to defend their town. Meanwhile, the UNHCR is warning of a possible humanitarian crisis in the coming days if the attacks persist.
This very town, you are 100,000, and if you are not brave enough, you will never remain in your town. And we are here with you to say, if we weren't that brave, we will not be here all the way from Maiduguri. You need to be brave indeed and stand for the peace and unity of your town. And if you vacate your town, nobody will remain here.
Since the governor said we should remain here in our town, we will abide by that and call all those that fled to come back and stay in our town.
OCHA also continues to receive very worrying reports of clashes between insurgent groups and the Nigerian armed forces in Damasak, in Borno State, and that non-state armed groups are targeting humanitarian assets and facilities, and recently also conducting house-to-house searches, reportedly looking for civilians identified as aid workers. The situation on the ground is extremely critical. If this continues, it will be impossible, maybe for longer periods of time, for us to deliver aid to people who desperately need it.
The United States is imposing visa restrictions on government officials in Uganda accused of involvement in human rights abuses and undermining democracy during the January 14 general elections. A statement by Anthony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, blames Ugandan security forces for the deaths and injuries of dozens of innocent bystanders and opposition supporters before, during, and after the elections. CGTN's Michael Baleke has more.
The names of the individuals being targeted have not been revealed. The Ugandan officials are accused of harassment, intimidation, arrest, deportation, and false legal charges against opposition candidates, civil society organizations, activists, and journalists. The U.S. Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, says this undermined the credibility of the election process, which he says was neither free nor fair. Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni was declared the winner of the January 14th elections with 58% of the votes. The U.S. government says the polls were marred with violence and widespread irregularities before, during, and after the election. However, the Ugandan government spokesperson Ofono Opondo says the U.S. has lost the moral high ground to give anyone lectures on democracy.
It is something that we had known for a long time, that generally speaking, America is a rogue state. And American leaders are rogues, generally speaking. But nobody from within their system had sufficiently exposed them to the world as Trump and his behavior has exposed them.
The U.S. restrictions also target immediate family members of those implicated in the visa ban. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Russia says it will expel U.S. diplomats and ban high-ranking U.S. officials as part of retaliatory moves over sanctions imposed by Washington. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says its officials have recommended the U.S. ambassador in Moscow leave the country for, quote, serious consultations, close quote. Among the top U.S. officials banned from entering Russia include President Joe Biden's chief domestic policy advisor and the chief of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The Russian action comes a day after the U.S. ordered the expulsion of 10 Russian diplomats and imposed new curbs on Russia's ability to borrow money. Washington's measures were in retaliation for the alleged interference by the Kremlin in last year's U.S. presidential elections and cyber attacks on federal agencies. China, France, and Germany have agreed to work more closely to tackle climate change and promote trade. Their leaders held a virtual summit Friday. Chinese President Xi Jinping reiterated the country's ambitious goals in cutting greenhouse emissions. Gao Yiming has more.
Peaking carbon dioxide emissions by 2030 and achieving carbon neutrality by 2060. President Xi Jinping said China will live up to those commitments. This means China, as the world's largest developing country, will go from a peak in emissions to neutrality in a span of 30 years, which Xi said will be the shortest time frame for such a mission. French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Angela Merkel welcomed the plan as the three nations try to find common ground on their green ambitions ahead of another climate summit of 40 world leaders hosted by the U.S. next week. President Xi said addressing global warming is a common cause of mankind, which should not become a geopolitical bargaining chip, a target used to attack other countries, or an excuse for trade barriers. Last year, China overtook the U.S. to become the European Union's largest trading partner. The president said China aims to provide a fair and non-discriminatory environment for foreign companies, including French and German firms, and he hopes Europe can do just the same to Chinese investors. The leaders also called for the early implementation of the China-EU Investment Pact, which was signed in December. The three leaders agreed to work together on COVID-19 vaccine production and distribution. Xi said China opposes what he calls vaccine nationalism and a man-made vaccine divide. The statement was echoed by Macron, who stressed that vaccines should not become a tool for competition among major countries. Xi said as the host country of the 2022 Winter Olympics, China is ready to work with the International Olympic Committee to provide vaccines to athletes. The three leaders agreed it's necessary to uphold multilateralism and fully implement the Paris Agreement on climate change, and they will jointly work towards a fair and win-win global climate governance system. They agreed to make climate change cooperation an important pillar of China-Europe relations. Gao Yiming, CGTN.
Chinese Vice Premier Han Zheng and U.S. climate envoy John Kerry have discussed climate cooperation via video link. Han says China attaches great importance to dialogue and cooperation with the U.S. on climate change. He stresses China welcomes Washington's return to the Paris Agreement and expects the U.S. will shoulder its responsibility and make its due contribution. Kerry says China has made huge efforts in dealing with climate change, and he says China-U.S. cooperation is crucial in dealing with this global challenge. Today is the last day of Kerry's 4-day visit in Shanghai to discuss climate cooperation. All right, the news continues on Africa Live. We'll see you on the other side of the break with more news. Here's a look at what's ahead. An artificial intelligence algorithm shows South Africa is not likely to see a third wave of COVID-19 infections at this time.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent, to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for sticking with us. Hundreds of patients are being evacuated from a hospital in Johannesburg after a fire blazed through parts of the facility. Hospital staff at the Charlotte Eke Hospital evacuated the patients to other hospitals. This is after the fire reignited in a dispensary almost 12 hours after it was initially reported. So far, no injuries or casualties have been reported. According to witnesses, the fire broke out Friday morning and was doused by the afternoon, only to reignite. The fire is said to have caused extensive damage to the facility that has more than 1,000 beds. The facility is also a designated treatment center for COVID-19 in Gauteng. The hospital has been closed for 7 days. The bodies of 20 children who died in a school fire in Niger on Tuesday have been buried in the capital, Niamey. Draped in the Niger flag, the bodies of the children were buried at the Saga Cemetery south of the capital city. The children perished when a fire raged through buildings made of wood and straw. Many of the children were trapped inside the structures. The government-run junior and preschool is located in the Pays Bas district of the city. Parents and other stakeholders have called on the government to construct safer schools for children.
Today we are saddened to watch the bodies of these lifeless little children pass by for burial. We believe that a strong message must be sent following this tragedy. Measures must be taken to avoid similar situations in the future. Classrooms must be created with sufficient ventilation so that in case of danger, students can be evacuated.
To lose very young children like this and on the eve of Lent is truly a sad event, and we offer our condolences to the grieving families. We share their pain because it is everyone who is affected, because children belong to everyone. We are really all affected by this tragedy. We reassure the people of Niger that we will do everything possible to find the culprits. If it is a crime, the perpetrators will be found and punished.
The African Centers for Disease Control has expressed cautious optimism that the pause in the use of the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine will be lifted after review by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. The suspension came soon after the manufacturers of the Johnson & Johnson jab had signed a deal with the African Vaccine Acquisition Trust to deliver 220 million doses of the vaccine. CGTN's Robert Nagila reports.
Shortly after the United States halted the use of the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine after 6 cases of blood clots were reported, South Africa announced it was also suspending the use of the vaccine out of an abundance of caution. More than 280,000 health workers in the African nation have so far received a dose of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
I held urgent consultations with our scientists who have advised that we cannot take the decision made by the FDA lightly.
The 6 cases in question are among more than 6.8 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine administered in the US. The suspension comes 2 weeks after Johnson & Johnson signed a deal with the African Vaccine Acquisition Trust to deliver 220 million doses of its vaccine later this year, and an option to order an additional 180 million doses. CDC Africa is cautiously optimistic the temporary suspension will not affect the deal with Johnson & Johnson.
We want to believe that it is truly a temporary pause, that the outcome will indicate that this was just some very rare events, and we will be able to continue with our vaccination, because it will constitute a major blow if that is not the case.
Africa only accounts for 2% of the more than 690 million COVID-19 vaccines administered globally. Health experts say they expect the suspension to be lifted shortly.
If it wasn't for the fact that we are on a trial basis and therefore have to pause, I would have expected that we would continue until things became clearer regarding these blood clots. But I want to put it very clearly, there is absolutely no concern that we have regarding the safety and efficacy of the J&J vaccine.
The African Union is expected to make a decision on its next steps after a review by the US Food and Drug Administration on the vaccine is completed. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
South Africans have been anticipating the arrival of a third wave of COVID-19. However, an artificial intelligence-driven algorithm has predicted otherwise. The system was designed to alert authorities about any impending spike in infections that could give rise to a third wave. The AI algorithm system says there is currently a low risk of a third wave. CGTN's Travis Andrews has more with this report.
Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, more than 1.5 million South Africans have contracted the virus. The COVID-19 second wave has been particularly costly, and many have lost their lives. Many were expecting a third wave of infections to be just as deadly, but an artificial intelligence-driven algorithm has downplayed the risk.
The risk of a third wave is small, meaning that we're not yet in a third wave. The early detection algorithms are basically about giving an alert to policymakers and the population as to whether there's something in the data that is compatible with a wave. So right now, we don't have a wave.
The algorithm was designed by experts at the University of Witwatersrand in partnership with the Temba Labs and other stakeholders within the government. Its analysis is said to be highly accurate, and other healthcare officials also concur that while the country remains vulnerable, the risk of a third wave remains low. The early detection system functions by predicting future daily confirmed cases based on historical data on South Africa's past infection rate.
The epidemiological picture, it's very complex and is driven by many parameters and is linked to many parameters and indexes. And you have to learn from the data. You have to use artificial intelligence through machine learning, because that's really the best tools in our arsenal to understand a complex problem with many parameters and many indexes, and B, extract parameters from the data.
Some experts believe that while the government may not rely solely on the algorithm, it does have an important role to play in the country's battle to mitigate the effects of the pandemic.
Obviously, we're in incredibly challenging times and a lot of gray area at the moment. And so any tool that a decision maker can use to help them make the best choice or help inform the best choice is a good thing. So this will just be one of many data points that a government official would look at to decide whether there's a need for a higher lockdown level.
The use of AI-driven algorithms may be a relatively new concept in South Africa's pandemic response, but some believe it may become more widespread. While the steady downward trajectory of COVID-19 infections has led to the same low-risk predictions by healthcare workers and the algorithm, super spreader events continue to make the country vulnerable to another massive spike. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
South Africans can now register online on the electronic vaccination data system to be scheduled for a COVID-19 vaccination. The registration will initially be open for people over 60, and the vaccines will be rolled out in 2 phases in May and October. The online system is linked to the supply chain management system and will be used to track the availability of doses in specific regions. Angela Coppola has more.
Senior citizens can self-register online or opt for assisted registration at walk-in centres and vaccination sites.
There will be no distinction between private and state healthcare users, with the exception that private healthcare users will input their medical aid details. The quality of the service will be the same for all of us, and the system will assign a vaccination site closest to our homes where we work, and not based on whether a particular site is a public or private facility.
There are a couple of issues facing authorities in their drive to vaccinate 67% of the population and reach that population immunity percentage needed to stop the spread of the pandemic.
I haven't planned it yet because they haven't rolled it out yet, but I've had COVID and I'm recovered, so I've got a few months to play with, I think, that I'm a little bit immune to it. I had COVID in December, but the symptoms weren't too bad, so I only went to test just to know.
There is a level of vaccination resistance that's beginning to emerge in South Africa.
I'm not so much desperately in favor of the vaccination program because I believe it also depends on your blood type, and some people just don't get it and some people are asymptomatic. I know some people get it worse than others, so if you want to be really safe, then you should vaccinate. But also you have to queue somewhere. And I don't know if they got enough vaccinations yet anyway.
There's an understanding that people susceptible to infections should take every precaution to protect themselves.
I think if you want to get vaccinated, you should be able to get vaccinated. But as I said, I'm a bit asymptomatic, so I'm not sure if I need it desperately, unless we have to have it to take airplane flights.
The registration website is live and receiving pre-registrations. Its developers say it's been tested to receive 3,000 registrations per second and can be doubled very quickly, which means that people over 60 years old can complete their registration.
For those senior citizens who can't go online or choose not to go online, they're going to have to come into physical premises like these behind me and get registered, and then later on come and get that vaccine. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
You're watching Africa Live. Don't go away. We'll be right back with more news. Here's a look at what's ahead. South Sudan gives hard currency to commercial banks to try and revive the ailing economy. And this Ugandan startup turns discarded banana stalks to eco-friendly items.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to Africa Live. We appreciate your company. The Bank of South Sudan has started giving hard currency to commercial banks to try and revive the ailing economy. The central bank says it will avail $5 million every week to financial institutions to help stabilize prices in the market. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
South Sudan Central Bank says commercial banks will access the monies through auction. According to the central bank, 22 financial institutions applied for the support, but so far 20 have received the hard currency. The central bank is giving $3 million to commercial banks and $2 million to foreign exchange businesses.
Every week we'll be auctioning $5 million, and therefore in a month we'll be auctioning not less than $20 million. And I think our market is very small. It will have a significant impact in the market in terms of the stability of the exchange rate and therefore the stability of prices.
The 6 years of civil war, limited production and increased government borrowing from local commercial banks to finance the deficit has stifled growth, but the return to relative peace recently earned South Sudan a loan of close to $175 million from the International Monetary Fund, IMF. South Sudan depends largely on oil money, which funds more than 98% of its budget, but the fall in global oil prices has diminished the country's revenues. However, economic experts argue that the government needs to do more to revive the economy.
If all the money generated, like for example from the oil, comes through the central bank, and the central bank regulates the use of the money and the currency in the country, whether it is foreign currency or our local currency, then the central bank will have the powers to control the economy of the country. But as long as even the government revenue generated are not channeled through the banking system in a correct manner, and it goes from one hand to another hand, even before it reaches to the central bank, we will continue to face the same problem.
The central bank is hopeful that the US dollars it is injecting in the market will mop up excess local currency, stabilize the South Sudanese pounds, and encourage business across the country. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
And Nigeria's government is planning to inject 396 billion naira, that's slightly more than $1 billion, to vaccinate its citizens against COVID-19. The country's finance minister, Zainab Ahmed, says the spending would be utilized between 2021 and 2022. The allocation may, however, reduce as the nation receives more donations from international donors and the private sector. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam has more on this report from Abuja.
Conversation around purchasing more COVID-19 vaccines has been top on the agenda of Nigeria's government engagements, especially at the meeting of the Federal Executive Council. Nigeria's Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, has said that the supplementary budget is an effort to close the nation's COVID-19 vaccine deficit.
A total of not less than 43 million doses of vaccines. So they're supposed to find out when those ones will come, because if we are going to get the donated vaccines and at the speed of the current rollout, we have to be slowing down on what we're buying ourselves.
Recently, health authorities called for a halt in the ongoing vaccination exercise across the nation due to a shortage of supply. Nigeria received a donation of 3.94 million doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine in March, barely enough to vaccinate about 1% of the country's 200 million strong population. Vaccine donations from other sources may significantly cut government's proposed spending.
This is working with partners that are donating these vaccinations. So we see the timelines of the donations and see the gap that the government needs to fill in 2021. But we have already provided to the ministry funds to enable them roll out the vaccines.
Well, government says there are plans to vaccinate up to 70% of the population by the end of 2022. Global demand for vaccines has skyrocketed as countries accelerate their inoculation drives. It's still not clear when the next batch of vaccines are scheduled to arrive, but government assures that the inoculation schedule would not be affected. Kelechi Mekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
A Ugandan startup is giving a new lease of life to one of the country's biggest sources of waste, banana stalks. The company processes the stalks from the banana plant that farmers usually burn or abandon and turn it into fiber to create a variety of products. Kimani Muturi, the founder of TexFad, says the 11 million tons of bananas that Uganda produces every year make him confident their efforts will pay off with growing global demand for sustainable fiber.
Bananas have long been a staple in Uganda, and the average citizen honors its place by consuming more than 200 kilograms annually, according to estimates by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. Typically, when farmers lop off bananas from the trees, they leave the bulky bulbous trunks to decompose and waste away. Now, a local startup in the East African nation is betting bananas can yield even more value through its natural fiber to produce environmentally conscious items.
We generate a lot of waste from the banana gardens. So I kept thinking, if this waste can be used for textiles, then we can be able to provide a sustainable product to the world. And then I started the journey for developing fibers from textile fibers from the waste stems.
The trunks of banana trees are split in half by machetes and fed into a machine. And from that process comes a long, leathery, moist fibers. So far, the company is exploring the fiber by making carpets, table placemats, and also hair extensions.
With cleaning the mats, it's very easy. When you try to clean them, they come back looking sparkling clean and almost as good as new. And definitely, I've come back to buy another one.
Texfad is also testing a process to soften banana fibers to the level of cotton so that it can be used to produce clothes. Kimani projects that Texfad will make 2,400 carpets this year, more than double last year's output, boosting revenue. The farm, which has 23 employees, made about $41,000 in sales last year, its best figures since launching in 2013. The company expects to ship carpets for the first time abroad in June to customers in the US, United Kingdom and Canada.
We have wholesalers from the US who are asking us how many tons can we ship. We have people in Europe who are asking us about shipping prices, in Canada, in Australia, and many parts of even Africa also. But we cannot be able to meet this market.
Kimani believes banana fiber is the fiber of the future. Due to its versatility, he sees the possibility of this organically produced material replacing synthetic fibers. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Let's shift gears to Tanzania, where one of the country's leading tertiary institutions is leading efforts to convert petrol vehicles to use compressed natural gas. Converting cars to consume gas can save motorists money as well as provide much-needed employment for young Tanzanians. CGTN's Daniel Kijo has more from the country's commercial capital of Dar es Salaam.
Tanzania is looking for more uses for its natural gas reserves. That is driving the adoption of compressed natural gas cars for commercial and public uses. Dar es Salaam Institute of Technology is at the center of these efforts. It has started offering affordable classes on how to change cars that use petrol as fuel into those that use gas. Before coming to DIT, Abdallah earned less than $50 a month. But he says skills pays the bills. Abdallah has now more than quadrupled his income.
Through this project, I have been able to stand on my own, get my own customers, because now I have hope that I can change my life, unlike before. It pays me way more than what I used to get as a low-skill garage boy.
The Dar es Salaam Institute of Technology was founded 60 years ago and is the oldest technical training institution in the country. It is here that components of the gas systems are installed. Officials at the institute say that the use of natural gas can cut costs between 40 and 50% compared to petrol. Technicians at DIT convert more than 50 cars per month.
Another advantage is issue of environment. You know, now there is a lot of concern with the environment, and as a country we're implementing this project so that we can minimize the pollutions of the environment.
The evening classes offer Tanzanians a chance to learn about the technology needed to convert cars in a safe and simple way. Tanzania has trillions of cubic feet of natural gas. The use of this gas in the country is likely to accelerate as more filling stations are established. But despite its advantages, compressed natural gas vehicles face several limitations. The tanks require a lot of storage space, and there is still a lack of infrastructure for delivery and distribution at fueling stations. But the team at DIT believe it's just a matter of time.
I think in 5 years, this technology will go very far. I think we will be needed and will by then have our own workshops and hire other youths.
As more drivers look to compress natural gas systems as a way to save costs and preserve their engines, Tanzania still has a long way to go before making this a mainstream option. But technicians like Abdallah hope this cleaner choice can offer a greener future for Tanzania's automobile users, as well as employment for young people like him. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
The news continues on Africa Live. Here's a look at what's ahead. A Tunisian creative artist depicts ties with China through theater.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Tunisian artist, comedian, singer, musician, and composer Mokdad Selhi has presented a new and very successful play entitled Hussein in Beijing. The play, which talks about the adventures of a Tunisian citizen in China, has been welcomed by the public and critics. Here's Adnan Shawalshi with the details.
Performed at the prestigious Municipal Theatre of Tunis, Hussein in Beijing retraces the extraordinary experience of a Tunisian adventurer who discovers the beauty of China and its great civilization.
Hussein is a hardworking Tunisian citizen who travels to China and falls in love with the country. He makes friends and starts a business in Beijing, which he failed to make at home. This play shows the respect of Tunisians for China and the people of this great nation and civilization.
This new play is viewed by actors and critics as a link between the people of China and Tunisia. It's a cultural and human bridge which brings people together.
It's a funny story with a funny actor. It's an amazing adventure. I enjoyed the play.
I've traveled to Beijing through this wonderful play. The ambience is fantastic. The main character wishes the best for Tunisia by learning from his successful experience in China. The new play is a must-see.
Hundreds of spectators have attended the premiere of the play. Hussein in Beijing has been described as an open invitation to visit China.
I want to visit Beijing after watching the play. China is a great country and civilization. It has helped us with vaccines and in all domains. Art is a special way of celebrating our friendship with China.
Since the outbreak of the pandemic in Tunisia, the Ministry of Cultural Affairs has banned all cultural activities. Hussein in Beijing has revived cultural life in the North African state.
Tunisian actor, singer and musician Mokdad Selhi has presented his second play to the public in the capital city Tunis. The success of the premiere has paved the way for dozens of performances throughout the country, as well as in theaters around the world. Adnan Shawalshi, CGTN, Tunis.
And we're not done just yet. We've got your sports news coming up in just a moment. Here's a look at the headline. In sports, more women taking up skating through Girls Skate South Africa.